No problem. Hello and welcome to the latest edition of my podcast today. I'm delighted to be joined by sports finance expert Kieran Maguire. So over the last day, we have found out that Wigan Athletic will be playing in League One next season after the appeal that we lodged on Friday against the EFL's 12-point deduction has been turned down, and Wigan will be playing in League One next season. And Kieran is here again on the podcast. I think we might need to start calling it the Kieran Maguire podcast instead of the J Whistle podcast. But thanks so much for coming on, and I'd like to get your immediate thoughts on the decision.
I'm not particularly surprised about the decision. The rules are very clear. I think the circumstances in which Wigan found themselves going into administration still need to be investigated, but that is going to cost money. If I was a Wigan fan, I'd be pretty gutted, to be honest with you. The club on the pitch have done well. To be acquired and just treated as a plaything by two rich people who, one of whom the club has never met, seems a complete travesty. There is no fairness in the game. The EFL had to apply their rules, I guess, but I think to add insult to injury, if the stories are true that Wigan have to bear the EFL's legal costs, I think it's just staggeringly miserable news.
Yeah, it's understood that the appeal costs Wigan Athletic around £500,000, and for a club that is currently experiencing administration, do you feel that's extremely harsh to impose?
Yes, I mean, I understand why the EFL have their rules, and they say it's to prevent people making frivolous appeals costing the EFL money. I don't think the actions of Wigan as administrators are frivolous. When I see the money that the EFL spent on Sean Harvey's payoff settlement last year, it just I find it difficult to express words, and I'm not even a Wigan fan. You've got to feel very disappointed. I've seen how much money the Wigan fans have generated to try to cover some of the running costs of the club, the non-wage running costs, and then for this to come through, then the rules have been enforced. To use coronavirus as a reason for not allowing the administration to go ahead, I don't think was ever a valid prospect, because the coronavirus was already around before the takeover occurred.
Yeah, it's a really difficult situation for the Athletic at the moment, and obviously they will be playing football in League One next year. How much does that impact the club on a financial point of view, and obviously finding a buyer too? Because obviously, if you buy a club in the Championship, it's more an attractive proposition because you're one step closer to the Premier League, and ultimately that's where every owner wants to be at the end of the day, because that's where the money is, and that's where the aspects and the dream of English football is really, if you consider the historic values of football.
Yes, I mean, the administrators have got a tough job. They're trying to sell the club in the middle of a pandemic, selling it, as you rightly said, as a championship club with you're one step away from the Premier League, but also the fact that you do have, you've got Derby and Forest and plenty of other big clubs, Stoke, who are not far away, who would sell out the DW away end on a regular basis, which would be good for match day income, assuming that we return to some form of playing football. The TV money's worth around about £6 to £7 million more in the Championship compared to League One. So therefore, a person buying the club would take that into consideration when they're making an offer. It's going to make the administrator's job harder. I think they'll have to accept a lower price, which of course will have impacts upon all the creditors who will now get paid less money. So yeah, it's bad news for the fans. The administrators, I think, will have to sell some more players in order to cover the running costs, because they've got no money coming in to run the club themselves. The clubs who are buying players from Wigan will be aware of that, and they'll price what they're prepared to offer for players accordingly. I can't criticise them for that. Business is business, but it's a sad day for the club. I think it's a sad day for football, but the rules have been applied on a very strict basis, and there isn't really a degree of latitude in terms of making an appeal against the 12 points. I guess what's happened with Sheffield Wednesday with regards to the fact that their 12-point deduction has been deferred until next season. And again, the reasons behind that do have some merit. Must make Wigan fans feel even worse than they do at present.
Would you be able to shed some light on the Sheffield Wednesday situation, please?
Well, we're still awaiting a full ruling. Sheffield Wednesday's events relate to 2018 when the ground was sold according to the accounts, but there was no reference of that going through the land registry until 12 months later. So that did seem a little bit strange at the time. The fact that the people who bought the ground from Sheffield Wednesday didn't pay any cash for it, again, that seems strange. Normally when you buy a property, you'd expect to pay for it immediately. That's being bought over 8 years. It just lends itself to sort of a series of curiosities. Wednesday, according to the TV programs matching curiosities. Sorry about that. That was Alexa. Sorry, Alexa. Go away, Alexa. And space curiosity. Oh man. That was Alexa chipping in. Sheffield Wednesday sold Hillsborough for £60 million. That was a profit, a huge profit to the club. That allowed them to stay within financial fair play. The EFL weren't happy about that. The appeal went in from the EFL to an independent tribunal, and the tribunal appears to have said, we've not seen the ruling yet, that the sale shouldn't have been included in the 2018 accounts for a variety of reasons, which we'll have to see. And as a result of that reduced Sheffield Wednesday's profits, or in fact increased their losses in effect by £38 million. That meant that they overshot the financial fair play limits by a huge amount, and therefore they were given a 12-point penalty, which is the maximum penalty you can be allotted for exceeding the limits. It does, however, raise further questions. For example, what would have happened if Sheffield Wednesday had made the playoffs? What would have happened if Sheffield Wednesday had finished in the top two in the Championship? Because points deductions in the EFL, they don't apply to the Premier League. So there are some elements of it which are very convenient, I think, for the EFL to have dragged out this case. They were originally charged in November. The ruling came through on the 31st of July. Wigan's was done and dusted very quickly.
Can you kind of make sense of the decision to obviously implement the 12-point reduction next season rather than the season we just had?
Well, we've seen that Wigan did put in an appeal against their points deduction, which applied immediately following the final match of the season, and that's in accordance with the EFL rules. I think there was a fear amongst the football administrators that if Sheffield Wednesday had been allotted a 12-point penalty this season on the 31st of July, Wednesday, under the EFL's rules, would have 14 days in which to lodge an appeal. So that takes us to the 13th or 14th of August. Then both parties would have needed time to put together their appeal, and we could have been at the end of August with the season due to start on the 12th of September, still not knowing which divisions clubs are in. And we still don't know that with regards to Stevenage and Macclesfield, with regards to appeals put in, with regards to points deductions there. So it is very, very messy. The only people are getting any, I think, pleasure out of this, and the EFL don't. I mean, the EFL come in for some criticism, but nobody there is enjoying what's happening at present. The only people who have got any fun at present are the lawyers and the accountants who, as you said, have managed to get, by all accounts, the thick end of £500,000 as a result of the appeal. And there's lots of these tribunals and there's lots of appeals going through at present. It's not what we as fans sign up for when you fall in love with a football club at the age of 7.
Absolutely. It's more of a legal point of view now, and it's a more of a legal business rather than just things being settled on the pitch. And it's almost the opposite of what football is. And my question to you is, obviously, with the decision not to relegate and punish Sheffield Wednesday this season, can you see teams such as Charlton or Wigan Athletic seeking legal action against this decision?
I think that they will listen to legal advice. If we look to see what's happened in Scotland, where Hearts and Partick Thistle put through, they tried to go through the courts to have a ruling overturned, which had been voted on by the clubs. That was rejected by the courts, who said ultimately this is a football issue, and the football authorities really have the final decision-making process. So that was kicked back to the SPFL, or the Scottish FA, who then decided that Hearts and Partick should be relegated. So getting lawyers involved is just creates an absolute minefield. It's the same with the accountants. It's a mess, and trying to find out an easy solution when there is so much money involved. Clearly for Sheffield Wednesday or Barnsley or Charlton or Wigan, we are talking around about £7 million. We're talking about dropping into League One next season with potentially no prospect of returning to matches taking place before a paying audience, and you've still got costs to pay out. It's going to make it very challenging for clubs to come up with budgets which are sustainable, which are realistic, and which will enable all clubs to survive.
Do you believe that it was a pure coincidence that the decision to obviously that was imposed on Sheffield Wednesday was announced hours after the Wigan Athletic appeal took place?
I do think it was a coincidence. The appeal the Sheffield Wednesday hearing had taken place a couple of weeks prior to that, and I believe that the committee had taken their time to consider the verdict, to write up the verdict, and so on. So it was a coincidence. The clubs themselves, by all accounts, the club and the EFL only found out a couple of hours before the announcement was made. Remember, this is made by an independent panel. It's not the EFL themselves who are judge and jury.
Yeah, absolutely. It's very important to remember that. And my final question to you is, and thanks again for coming on the podcast at such short notice, but do you think this 12-point deduction could send Wigan on the way to potential liquidation if they don't find a buyer?
If they don't find a buyer, then I think liquidation will be the case. We have seen the administrators say that they've had a number of interested parties. They did have 4 or 5 who appeared to be genuine, though the first one, of course, dropped out almost straight away. It's not helping. It's not helping the prospects of Wigan surviving. The only consolation is the vast majority of clubs who have gone into administration have come out the other side, and that has allowed them to, in many cases, flourish. Coventry City have just been promoted, which is good. Portsmouth are doing well in League One. Luton have now got up into the Championship. You've got the likes of Crystal Palace and Leicester in the Premier League. All of these clubs have been in administration and come through, and that's the one saving grace, is that football, despite its history of clubs living beyond their means, and that doesn't really apply to Wigan in my view, that it's just strange circumstances which really do need some form of formal investigation. The clubs have managed to come through and get into a football area as opposed to an accountant running the club.
Absolutely. I think it's a very good point. And I'd like to say a massive thank you for coming on the podcast. You've been excellent as always. If you'd like to catch Kieran in all of his glory, he has the Price of Football podcast on Spotify with Kevin Day, and it is really informative and insightful on the football finance world. And I'd like to say a massive thank you to every Wigan fan who's not only watched the podcast, but who helped with the appeal too. The fans couldn't have done any more in helping with our case, and they've been excellent in raising money to obviously make the case even happen. And I think the fans deserve a lot of credit. And I think for new owners looking at Wigan Athletic, I think the biggest selling point will actually be the fans, because there might not be a lot of Wigan fans there. I know it's the common joke, empty seats, no fans, no history. But what we don't have in quantity, we certainly make up in quality. And I think the fans have been outstanding throughout, as they have all season. And I think they deserve a lot of credit, as do you, Kieran, because you've been outstanding, obviously giving information and obviously helping digging up the financial records too, because for some people like myself and other people, it's alien, the financial side of things, and you're excellent at what you do, and you should get a lot of credit for that.
Well, thanks. I wish I never appeared on another show again in my life, because that means that football wouldn't need people like me. But best wishes to everybody at Wigan. I know my partner partner in crime, Kevin Day, he did the fans quiz last Thursday. Yeah, we are rooting for you. We're fans ourselves, and the vast majority of fans think what has happened to Wigan is a disgrace. But unfortunately, it's a set of rules set up by club owners. The profitability and sustainability rules which operate, the owners and directors test. These are rules which have all been put through by club owners in the interests of club owners, not in the interest of fans.
Absolutely, and I think it's a very important point to end the podcast with. So, Kieran, thank you so much for your help and thanks for coming on. Thanks to everyone for watching, and I'll see you guys for the next podcast.